Welcome to Zero Knowledge, a podcast where we explore the latest in blockchain technology and the decentralized web. The show is hosted by me, Anna.
And me, Frederick. In this episode, we share some insights from the folks who went to the UX Unconference this week in Toronto.
So we're here in Toronto. That's how you say it as a Canadian.
Toronto.
Right now I'm sitting with Frederick and I'm sitting with Maciej.
Hey, glad to be here. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, Maciej's been on our podcast before, some time ago. We're here in Toronto because, I think mainly because of Edcon. So Edcon was happening. And it was pretty cool as there were some events around it, some before, some after. This episode is actually going to be focusing on an event that happened post-Edcon. It was called the Web3 UX Unconference. And this was a very different kind of conference. This wasn't sort of sitting and watching panels. It was a really engaged workshop-style roundtable with a smaller group but a high quality of people there. It was really great, I thought.
Yeah, and just like it's basically all the people that are working on the UX problems of this space. And there are plenty of them, and in the interviews coming, I'm sure we'll dig into some of those problems. But like it's Metamask, MyCrypto, and like all the big players who are working, like dealing with users, just trying to make this something that is usable by normal people and who just like are interested in using the technology, which is something that isn't really seen all that much. Like the space is very much still in this land of like by developers for developers kind of feeling. And like traders have come in and sort of made like they have completely different requirements and different sort of attitudes to things as well. So I think that just normal user experience doesn't get enough attention.
Yeah, totally. So the unconference is a very necessary thing. Like the UX in general is like this child that's like been left on the side when we are talking about crypto. It's like everyone cares about scaling and sharding and security and all this other stuff, which is really important, and kind of like leaves the actual like human interaction of this stuff in the shadows. And we should actually look at it because this technology is kind of useless if people don't use it, right?
So this is sort of an interesting episode. We're going to be doing it a little bit different. What we ended up doing was we interviewed a bunch of people who came to the event, and we asked them a small selection of questions. I asked actually the same questions to everybody. And what we're going to do is cut together a little bit of a highlight of some of the answers that we got from these participants. And this is sort of the first of its kind on this podcast that we're trying to do kind of an event podcast. So yeah, I hope it makes sense and brings some insight into what we actually talked about. So here we go.
My name is Dan Tsui. I run Kyokin. We're a software engineering consultancy that is based in the San Francisco Bay Area. We run a remote first distributed engineering team that builds products, services, and implements protocols for public chains.
Dan, you actually helped put this event together. Can you tell me a little bit about how it came to be?
Plasma researcher David Knott is basically the inspiration for this event. I hung out with him in Bangkok after an ETH Bangkok meetup, and we discussed their ongoing work on the Plasma SDK and how challenging it was going to be for them to talk to the other wallet teams and integrate their scaling solution with existing users, and to kind of give you the other side of the problem. Like, we work very closely with Metamask team and interact with the MyCrypto team. Scaling solutions like Plasma are very far down their roadmap because there's so many real user problems that need to be solved. So the point of this unconference is to allow these teams to meet and discuss and share ideas and work in person without all of the overhead of the standard like channels and setting up meetings. Yeah.
And what's sort of different about this event?
What's different about this event is that it maximizes for global value to the space versus all of the other things that you could maximize for when you're planning an event. We're not trying to pump a project or like participate in any ICO nonsense. The filter for people to attend this event were individuals that were working full-time on product with real users in the space. So the participants of this event, like, the value that they get out of it will translate directly to value to real users that are transacting, and they're like, we've sort of not added any other complexity to it.
What do you think we can learn from Web 2.0?
As an entrepreneur, the most important thing I think that we can learn from Web 2.0 is that in order to get to Web 2.0, there was a nuclear winter during which you couldn't get a U-Haul out of San Francisco because they weren't coming back. And the projects that are currently working in the space, some of them have a hint of this in just a macroeconomic sense. They know that there are bubbles, but most of them either haven't lived it or haven't read about it or really like felt that. And like learning that firsthand, I think, is going to be a mark of maturity.
What is an exciting new idea in UX, a project or paradigm that you've recently seen?
So I was kind of busy and I wasn't able to watch all the talks, but I heard from the other attendees that there were a few talks about multi-signing and using account abstraction to basically like generate device-specific keys, and I like the way that the presenter phrased it, which was like, I'm basically tricking users into using a multi-sig. Let's do more of that. I think that's really exciting, and I think that as that infrastructure gets built, there's the second order effect of like people have better and more ideas, and they'll tweak the flows, and it'll just be good times.
So, do you want to just introduce yourself in one sentence?
I'm Philippe, and I am a freelancer for smart contract development on Ethereum. I used to work for ZRX for about 6 months last year, and then I started in January to act more as a freelancer.
What are your thoughts on the current state of UX?
There's definitely a lot of pain points, and I think we don't necessarily realize it when we're so used to being in a blockchain space. And I think the most obvious one is paying for every transaction. To me, that's probably the worst user experience.
What do you think the biggest mistake in UX in blockchain has been?
At least from the Ethereum, in the world of Ethereum, the main UX problem that I've seen is that every action on a blockchain requires a transaction. And what I mean by this is, if you take the standard ERC20 standard, which is how token operates on, most of the tokens are on Ethereum, if you want people to transfer funds from your account to somewhere else, or it could be a smart contract. If you want a smart contract, give permission to a smart account to transfer some of your tokens to another tokens, which is necessary, for example, for decentralized exchanges and other things like that. It's required first to approve the contract, and then secondly, the contract has to withdraw. But there's other way of doing it where you don't need 2 transactions or minimum of 2 transactions. You could, for example, sign a message saying this contract is able to withdraw my funds or this amount of funds, and that reduced the amount of transaction required by half. And there's a lot of instances where people really should utilize off-chain solution instead of on-chain solution. And I think in the last 6 months, I've seen a lot of people starting to realize that most of what they're trying to implement can be done without interacting with the blockchain by just having these kind of off-chain solutions. And I think that's really, like, from a user perspective, it's much better because you have much less transaction, much less, and reduce the load on the network as well. So it's just better for everyone.
What is an exciting new idea in UX, a project or new paradigm?
I think part of the talks and discussions, everything regarding making key management more efficient, so not having to care as much as your private key, not having to have to be still able to interact with the blockchain without having funds. I think there has been a lot of discussion around this at Edcon and at this UX Unconference. And I think this is a huge change in paradigm that we're going to see in the next year for the Ethereum community, where users can still interact with the blockchain without having any cryptocurrencies, or they could still they could still lose their private key and have a means to recover it, or they could, have all these extra security layers that most regular user in the real world, outside world, are expecting to have when they have an account. Having one account for Twitter, be it you log in on your phone, be it you log in on your laptop, I think people expect that, and I think there's a lot of ideas around this that are coming that will make it easier.
What did you think about this event?
I'm not a UX designer at all. As I said, I'm fully back end. And for me, it was really interesting to see like the discussion around the UX and the kind of problems people are struggling. Because a lot of the times, I didn't realize that some of the solution that gives a better user experience are actually coming from the people that are more technical and more deeper in the protocol. That some solutions that are more technical than design, or like how to show this information, can actually lead to significant user experience. And talking to other people made me realize that actually there's a lot of room for anyone to participate and improve the user experience, not just the people that design the interface that the user interact with.
I'm Alex van de Sande. I've been working on the Ethereum Foundation since 2014, and I lead the Ethereum wallet and the Mist browser projects. Last year I was deeply involved in launching ENS, and this year I've been involved in multiple ERC discussions.
How do you feel about the event so far?
I really like the format of a roundtable discussion. This sort of event makes the roundtable discussions the most important thing. And because they are very focused and they have all the main players of the ecosystem, they are together, they are very interested in interacting and finding solutions together, it usually is very productive. Last year we have a very similar format on ENS discussions, and it was very, very good and very productive.
If you were to pick one UX pain point in blockchain, what would that be?
So one of the things we often underestimate is the effect of how you got in the system, right? So the way you got into the system really affects how you behave and how you think and why you do it. And one of the things that you need to do in order to execute anything on the Ethereum ecosystem is you need to have Ether. And the only place you can get Ether is via an exchange or buying it somehow. So we might think, whenever you're building an app, you might think that your onboarding process starts when they download the app or when they go to your site. But that's not true. The real entrances in this ecosystem are exchanges. And those are exchanges that will ask for a ton of personal information, that will require a lot of documentation and work and will not accept credit cards. And then they filter out a lot of people that are just barely interested in the topic, and they heavily bias people who are into it for investment or trading and things like that, right? So I think it really, the ecosystem, here's an example. The way it changes the ecosystem can be seen in things like the apps. One of the reasons probably that a lot of apps are related to flipping and trading and things like that is probably because the people who are able to do those apps are people who came into the ecosystem because they wanted to flip tokens. And now suddenly they find the opportunity to flip cats or flip robots or flip just virtual nonsense because they find that to be fun. And I think one of the things that we really, really, really need to do to solve that onboarding process is really solve how you get your first coin, or how you earn your first coin, or maybe how you can interact it without having to earn any coin at all.
What do you think, in terms of UX, was the biggest mistake or direction that was taken specifically in blockchain?
I don't think there was any big decision that was made that was a mistake in the sense that we can't fix it, right? I really think that we are so early in the space that we really can fix most of those stuff. I would say, just also because that's what I've been talking to everyone here, is that I think one of the things that we should do differently from now on is that we shouldn't treat private keys as the thing that identify you, right? And the thing that you use to log into things, and the thing that and also the same place you keep tokens and funds. In my opinion, we should just stop putting ethers, stop putting tokens into accounts, right? Don't store funds using private keys. We should use those private keys as just authorization tokens where you can sign messages and then send it to a contract, which can be done in a much better way with a lot more recovery options, with a lot more creative options, and that contract can be controlled by that private key. But the private key itself should be something that if you lose it, it's not a problem, right? And that's because by focusing on only this idea where you keep private keys and then you put money on it, that's how you get to like $80 million hard drive that is lost in a dumpster, right? Or a lot of similar stories like this. Private key should not be to store funds, in my opinion.
What are your last thoughts? UX, blockchain, this event.
One of the interesting things I've noticed is that, like last year, we had like the ICO craze, right? And that was heavily criticized. And I agree that we've some projects have gone too far, and there are a lot of projects that raise too much money, and that's bad. But on the other hand, a few projects that did raise tons of money are suddenly like in another level, right? If you take a look at what Aragon is doing or what Status is doing, they are not playing around anymore, right? The level that they are playing, it really doesn't feel like this hobby thing that we've been doing a few years ago. Like just 2 years ago, everyone was just in it together for like hobby and fun, etc. And suddenly now they have like a lot of designers and usability studies and user testing and good typography and a lot of things like that really show that we are playing the big leagues now. And I think that's super exciting, right? It shows that, yes, there was some excess last year, but that doesn't mean that every single ICO was failed. And I think some people who have a lot of money are doing some very good things with it, and I think that's fantastic thing, like even in like the user experience point of view.
I'm Jonny Howle. I'm the lead product designer at Uport. Uport is a spoke or a startup, I guess, at Consensus, and Consensus is an Ethereum venture studio.
What UX mistake do you think has already kind of been made, like in terms of a paradigm that everybody's using or sort of language that everybody's using? Like, what is a mistake with today's system?
Private key management is one. Transactions and understanding the concept of gas is second. There's some people working on whether or not we should just abstract gas away from certain users. So maybe that won't be a problem very much longer. Another pain point is language. I think Andreas Antonopoulos speaks a lot about this when he gets a UX question, and it's this idea that wallets don't actually function like wallets, coins don't actually function like coins, gas kind of functions like gas, but obviously the metaphor isn't one-to-one. I guess that's why it's a metaphor, but there's a number of language issues. Smart contracts really are just programs. Accounts and identities are words that don't really map on to what's happening either. I mean, contracts and entities and programs can have identities too that are the same as identities for people.
If you could pick one pain point that you think is like the main pain point, I know there's a couple, what would that be?
I think the obvious one is the reliance on seed phrases. And physical pieces of paper, ultimately. That is just an untenable state of affairs.
What are previous experiments or research, doesn't have to actually be in blockchain, it could be in anything, that you think we could use as we build out new UX for Web3?
If we move pre-internet, there are a lot of things, especially dealing with identity, that I'm thinking about, and actually just strip away the technology and just think about information hierarchy, and how people read, essentially. And thinking about things like voting ballots, social security forms, your I-9, a lot of these governmental documents and tax forms. I think that these are notoriously bad. I think there are, however, some use cases out there from some certain more progressive countries that have done way better jobs of simplifying these things and actually set designer to the task of reimagining some of these experiences, even though they're not digital. And I think that could be useful to look and see what worked there in terms of how do we structure information hierarchies in these highly technical situations where at the end of the day, the user does need to get through all of the steps and implement and input all of the information. But it can be painful, and maybe it's going to be painful. It's a matter of how much can we lessen the pain. And I think maybe looking at the pre-internet communities could be interesting.
What is an exciting new idea in UX, a project or new paradigm that you've recently learned about, maybe even at this event?
The thing I've been thinking about is non-fungible tokens. And I think of, again, it's one of the most prevalent examples of anything in this space, but it's CryptoKitties. And CryptoKitties designed a system in which you could generate from a number of attributes that were pre-designed, you get a coherent kitty at the end. But the designer who designed this system obviously wasn't able to pre-design or validate iterative iteration of cat. So I wonder about generative assets in the future and how to think about designing all of the pieces that come together to create the final asset. So in a way, it's kind of like a design system, but it's a design system for the pieces that create your generative asset to make sure that it always produces something worth having.
Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Dan Finlay. I'm one of the lead developers and kind of product lead on Metamask, which is a browser extension that lets you use Ethereum applications on the web. And it's been pretty popular in the last year, and a lot of different kinds of Ethereum-based applications have built their interfaces compatible with our interface. And so it's been a really fun year. And so we've had a lot of kind of the first experience of what it's like to provide a user experience for people interacting with blockchain applications, right? Before, it was all just sending money around. Now we're seeing what it's like to just do anything, right? And it's a very open-ended problem, and so it's been quite a thing to think about.
Are you like the event so far?
We've actually wanted to have this for a long time. I'm one of the earliest Ethereum wallet developers, and we are a pretty small community, and we've wanted to get together and have like WalletCon for a long time because we just have a lot of woes in common. I mean, when there's a big crisis on the network, like people may be like, oh, the network's out, whatever, but they are all just ragging on us. Like they're emailing us, they're bombing us. It's a very abusive environment at times. We've since staffed up. We have strong support teams now. We have stronger knowledge bases. But like when this thing kicked off, when the ICO craze started in last June or July, like it hit us. It totally blindsided us. We did not know how fast or hard it was going to come. And so coming together and talking about the issues that we're hitting, the things that are holding users back, the things that are confusing them, pain points, and the things that are giving us friction, it's just invaluable time to spend together. And it's such a niche part of the blockchain community that, that's why it took so long to do,
So what are your thoughts about the current state of UX in the blockchain?
The current state of UX on the blockchain is a minimum viable product. It is a beta. It is janky. We slapped it together. Most of the stuff that's working, is based. There's parts of our code base that is years old, and we've been like scratching at how to answer some of these really hard problems that have held people back. And the whole time there have been basic questions because people come in here and they try to send a transaction and they're like, what is this? They're like, what's gas? What's a nonce? What is ether? What is this? Why do I have this funny money? You know? And then what's that data at the end? And why are all these random characters everywhere? You know, it's just like completely incomprehensible. I'm amazed that normal people have put up with the way it is so far, but I think it's the token mania, the kind of prospect of easy riches that has kept people so pernicious to various degrees of success.
If you were to pick one, what is the ultimate pain point? What is the biggest pain point right now in UX?
The thing that I'm taking away from this event right now, the one pain point that I think that we're all having in common and that I think we need to coordinate to solve is how to comprehensively review transactions that are being signed. And in fact, out of this event, I think I've really completely now broken the line between a signature and a transaction. They're all signatures. They're all just kinds of signatures. And the question is just, what does the signature do? And how can we agree on what a given type of signature is going to do? They're all just user actions. They're all just intentions. And the thing that is breaking up a lot of our community at times is we'll implement different signature methods and they'll be incompatible. And then people have proposals, but then they change and we can't just stay on the same page. And hey, it's a coordination game. Maybe the blockchain can help.
What was the mistake? What was a mistake that you would say was taken kind of early on UX-wise that we're now dealing with? And it's not that it's not fixable. It could be fixable. But is there something you think sort of that a wrong path was taken?
So the security of the blockchain completely depends on being able to hold a secret in a computer you trust. And early on, people were not used to that pattern, and they just kept on putting their private keys into places that didn't belong. And we're just gradually nudging them safer and safer places. We're like, oh yeah, maybe in the command line it can just auto sign, and they're like, oh no, that's not good. Maybe I can just paste it in this browser. Oh wait, no, they'll just steal it or DNS hack. And they're like, oh well, maybe I can just do this with it. I mean. So now I'm making Metamask. Now maybe it's in a browser extension. We don't get hacked. I haven't heard of a user say they get hacked. But if a user got compromised, if their computer got hacked, then they could lose their accounts. So now we've also got hardware accounts, and the Paradig's got their signer, and so we're just moving the keys further and further out. Basically, it's all just a series of mistakes until you really, really have your keys somewhere you can trust. And we're just going to keep on making mistakes until we make that easy for everybody.
What's a really exciting idea, project, or new paradigm that you're seeing in blockchain UX?
Thanks to some really great development in smart contract account design, we're seeing a lot of new ideas around how people can basically get into the Ethereum ecosystem or any blockchain basically with lower friction, without maybe seed phrases, without accounts, inviting friends, models where we basically just start leveling out that adoption. And adoption is currently a really huge pain. So all these new novel ways of managing your account and getting in easy and having safer recovery, they're really exciting. I think it's going to massively improve the usability of the whole thing.
So what are your last thoughts on UX, blockchain, or this event?
Okay, so here I go. Here's the crazy idea I had today. Okay, basically, if we get the developers of all these different wallets to have some tokens, and then they can use those to vote together on a shared registry of signer modules, then we can stop worrying about developing the interface for approving signatures. So today, whenever there's a new signature type, or if somebody wants to add plasma network, or if they want to add a state channel support, or if they want to add counterfactual state channels, they have to pull request Metamask, and they have to be add support for a thing, and then we have to go into research into design mode, and and then everyone's you take forever to make things, and we're we're bottlenecked, why don't you help? Meanwhile, every single client designer is doing the exact same thing. We're all reproducing approval flows and implementations for every single signature method. So the idea is basically a token curated registry of wallet devs to coordinate around the problem of curating a set of signature methods, their implementations, a little test case, and an approval screen. And if you can make it in a general enough way, obviously you need it to be portable across platforms. And I know they vary a lot. It could be Metamask, it could be your phone, it could be a little hardware wallet. But if you make it general enough, then many clients could benefit from the same registry, and we could just have consistent implementations, and suddenly people could add new networks, and we could be talking between each other, and people wouldn't have to come down, beating down my door to add their pull request.
So you're basically talking about a token curated registry that would help to standardize in a way, across many different groups.
Yeah.
how things are being built?
Yeah, I'll be honest. I don't follow the token curated scene as tightly as I probably should. I have some friends that are very into it. But the general notion is that if the token holders can propose something to be added to a set, and if the other token holders say it was malicious, then they slash that person's deposit and they like lose funds. And so it's just like a coordination game for like agreeing on a set of things. So I don't know how I feel about like slashing funds just for a bad proposal. Like, if we were going to use it for interfaces, we would probably want to tune it, make it gentler, have a rejection and review process, because we're not trying to kick people out. We want to encourage iteration. But if we replace these signature methods, which have like such absolute names like ETH sign, if we replace that with just like an address of a signature method, suddenly implementation becomes a much more casual thing. It's not like, oh, this is the end all be all of signature types. This is the signature type I use in my smart contract, and it lets signers become much more versatile and open-ended.
Thanks so much for the interview.
Cool. Yeah, it was my pleasure.
Hi, my name is Ric Burton, and I'm working on a project called Balance. The domain name for it is balance.io. We've just released a project called Manager, which helps you to manage your existing wallets, and we'll be releasing a mobile wallet later this year.
So, thinking about UX today, what are your thoughts? Where do you think we're at?
Yeah, I think I try and focus on the numbers so that we can just have like a very easy discussion about the realities of where we're at. And I think we have around 30 million speculators in the crypto assets. And as far as I can see, roughly 30,000 daily active users of distributed applications. And in the kind of hierarchy of people who are down the rabbit hole, that's to say that the top of the rabbit hole is quite wide in terms of people are beginning to enter the space and understand that owning these crypto assets is of some interest to them, but very, very few people are actually using them on a daily basis for any value. So I think that's the number we ought to pay attention to as a community, is how many people on a daily basis are getting some benefit from a cryptographically powered application or net running on a protocol.
What do you think right now is the biggest UX pain point in the blockchain space?
I think that the biggest myth that we have got ingrained in nearly all of our minds is that usability and security are at opposite ends of a spectrum. I think that it's extremely hard to bring them together, but it's not impossible. And so the biggest issue we have is key recovery, where right now on one end of the spectrum, you can either use a great service like Coinbase, where you give up access to your private keys, and in return, you kind of pay fees as you use the product, and they kind of invest in amazing security engineers. Or you can kind of go to the other end of the spectrum where you learn about key management, you buy a crypto steel, a hardware wallet, and you start to become extremely paranoid and use air-gapped devices, and there are all these things which won't appeal to the masses.
What do you think could really help to push the user experience in blockchain forward?
One of the things I think that is really useful is to just take the existing mental models that people already have and try and slide our protocols into them. And so to take a concrete example, there is not a bank in the world that asks you to install a Chrome extension. So this idea of money and the storage of value and anything like that, no one uses a Chrome extension. I think Metamask is a wonderful project as it kind of weaves together the internet and the interchain and kind of links these things that weren't previously linked. But it's not a mental model that people are familiar with. And so our solution to this is not novel or special. It's to merely take an existing model, which is WhatsApp's login model, where the center of the world is the phone, and the web app is a kind of satellite, and you use a QR code to establish a connection between the mobile app and the web app, and then those two things can communicate. And this is a very simple protocol we've created, and it's called Wallet Connect. And we think the user experience is just fantastic, and that's the way it should go. And a lot of people are very comfortable with doing something on the web and confirming it on their phone, whether it's authenticating with Google Auth or doing a bank transaction and then confirming it in their bank's app. So we think that, and we pay careful attention to any mental models from a user experience perspective that are already there that we can kind of just slide into so that we don't have to teach people new patterns. So what is an exciting new idea that you've either seen today or generally in UX? What are you getting excited about? Yeah, I'm incredibly excited by Alex van der Sand's work to pull together a bunch of different ideas about how to improve wallet security and usability into this kind of single concept. He's been collaborating with the team at Status, who are fantastic, and they've come up with this notion of a kind of smart contract, almost storage space for your funds that will be described and linked to by an Ethereum name service domain. So, for example, Balance might instantiate the kind of ricburton.balancewallet.eth, and then this kind of base for my funds would then be authenticated against my browser in my desktop, my browser on my laptop, my browser on my phone, my browser on my spare phone, and then I could also kind of specify a custodian who I trust to get me back in, or a friend I trust to get me back in. And essentially, the hub of your funds lives on Ethereum, and the ways to sign transactions and kind of initiate them are all kind of the satellites to your existing work. And this is amazing because then you can introduce all kinds of clever logic, such as if I'm spending 1 ETH a day, just verify on the device itself. If I'm spending 10 ETH, then make sure it's 2-factor. If I'm sending all my funds at once, it's got to be triple factor, and my dad's got to sign off on it. And like, I just think this is genius. And we're going to spend an awful lot of time trying to work with them and trying to implement this in the Balance products. So, yeah.
Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name's Bryant Eisenbach. I'm from Connecticut in the United States, and got in this space a little last year. I used to work as a flight software developer, and got in this space because I saw the need for my particular skill set and trying to apply it to smart contract development specifically. So I do a little bit of contracting. I have a community in my home state, and we have this project for smart contract development guidelines that just got a little bit of Ethereum Foundation funding, and we're looking forward to working on that with some partners in the space.
So what are your thoughts about the current state of UX in blockchain?
On 3 separate occasions, I was about 15 seconds away from sending my Ether to a scam address. So I think that kind of speaks for itself in a little ways.
What do you think is the biggest pain point?
I think the biggest pain point is for UX in particular. So I think it's just such a new paradigm that it's hard to identify all the things that are actually really, really different in how this technology operates. And, it's mostly developers that we work with at this point as far as dApp makers. So it's kind of hard to gauge whether something is truly obtuse or just technically complicated.
What do you think we could actually learn from Web 2.0?
So over the past 10 years, a lot of Web 2.0 classical application developers have learned a lot about how to design very clear interactive user interfaces. And I actually see that as being a really good thing for this space because we can directly leverage that experience. Most of what Ethereum and decentralizing blockchain technologies, to use all the buzzwords, is about the back-end experience, really. So it's really a set of technologies made for engineers. It's not quite made for people, but it enables people to do really cool things.
What would you describe as the biggest sort of UX mistake that you've seen in this space?
I think a lot of people are learning as they go, and most of the UX mistakes I see being made is something being a little too complicated or not well explained. I think the work that Edcon presented at the conference about adding into like the comments of the code you create, like different user messages and stuff, so, like you kind of bake it into the protocol layer, all the different documentation messaging that you give to users. I think that's really interesting.
What are the previous experiments or research, maybe from different fields, that you think we could look to in order to push the UX in this space forward?
I just think in general, not forgetting about like all the work that has been done, Twitter and Facebook and stuff. They spent many years optimizing their craft and their applications, and a lot of it is shared open source, which is really cool of them. So don't forget about that. I'm not sure if UX in particular is being shared, but the great thing about UX is you can't hide it. It's literally how you interact with the thing. So just use it as good examples of what to do and not to do.
So what is an exciting new idea, a project or new paradigm that you've seen in the space?
So passwordless authentication, that's something that's never really existed before. And that's super cool to me. We can get rid of the password problem by just not having them in the first place. It all becomes device-specific authentication keys, and that you will authorize access to in order to gain access to an application. You don't have to remember passwords. No one does anyways. The system is broken, so let's fix it.
Do you have any last thoughts that you want to share about UX and blockchain?
I think this is one of the fundamental problems of the space that will need to get solved before we're able to convince other people to adopt us. And there's so many different problems that even the regular web space never had to deal with before, because now we're including money into our applications that it's going to take a lot of effort to overcome.
So that is a bit of a sort of a look at some of the interviews that I got to do while we were at the UX Unconf. And it was pretty cool to get a chance to speak to these people. I felt like, there was a lot of people there that we didn't get a chance to talk to. I really wish we had a chance to speak to the MyCrypto people, but they left before I could grab them. Maybe we can get them on another day. But I think the way I'd like to actually wrap up this episode is, why don't we also share our final thoughts? So maybe, Frederick, do you want to start?
Sure. I think what's been really interesting in hearing everyone talk and being at this thing is that there really is a general consensus around the UX problems, and that there are problems, that there isn't enough effort and money being spent on, just designers, product people, all the sort of efforts that go into making a good user experience. There were super interesting takeaways around like how you do account management and like key management. So Alex van der Sande had a really great talk on being able to distribute your keys and having multiple accounts and like super creative ways of basically having 0 Ether accounts and then have some other account pay for gas so that you can like distribute identities in a cool way. And like for me, like that's a deeply like technical, interesting solution to what is fundamentally a UX problem. So obviously there still needs to be a lot of work done on top of this stuff, but it's cool to see that like people are thinking about this throughout the whole stack. And UX still is the main problem. Like it's still a massive problem in this space. In a way, I'm actually a little bit glad that it is such a big problem, because it allows us core client developers to like a little bit more breathing room before there's a billion people joining and crashing the network. But I think it's really, really cool and inspiring to see what's going on.
Yeah. So just to echo the thoughts, I think I my like final thoughts is that I'm actually quite hopeful for the space, and because like it's good to see all the like smart people trying to tackle the problems that we have, but it's also very interesting to see the people tackle the problems together and actually come together, and people who would be in any other like space competitors actually come together and like, hey, let's try to figure this out together, because we like all of us have different experiences and we've run maybe different problems with our users, and we can just share our learnings and try to solve those problems together. So I think it's also like the sign of the just the quality of the community around Ethereum itself, that the people who build this stuff are really very collaborative, and they are all friends. We are all friends. I think I'm just cheering up for solving the big problems.
I feel like there's this new sense of urgency. That's what I got from it. Was these conferences, the EIP, Edcon not so much maybe, but like the UX event, like they're being put together because there's this feeling like, whoa, this space has exploded. These problems that were kind of problems you could just sort of leave for now because they weren't that important. The user base wasn't that big. There was not so much high stakes stuff happening. That time seems to be like over. I think people now really feel that these issues can't be left alone. They have to start to be addressed. That was the feeling I got from these interviews. And I think a point that really stood out to me was this idea that, I mean, this was an amazing event, and it brought together some of the best like devs and kind of engineering minds and a few product people. But I think it was like Jonny. Somebody made a point that there aren't really enough other types of product people who are participating in the space right now, specifically designers, product designers, UX designers. And one of the reasons is they may be, like a lot of the devs have been able to sort of create and ship quite independently without needing sort of big infrastructural teams. Whereas the UX designers and the designer kind of person, that role doesn't quite fit in that like pure decentralized independent model yet. And that it would be really wonderful to find ways to bring more of those people to the table. I mean, I have a lot of friends who are UX designers who are interested, but they actually don't know at all like how to get in or where to get in. And I thought that was sort of a takeaway after this, for me at least, was like, wow, that is something. If those problems are to be solved, then the community also needs to find a way to bring more of those people in and incentivize them. Yeah, so I guess that sort of concludes our Toronto week of conferences and a little wrap up of the UX Unconference. Maciej, thanks again for joining us on this episode.
Thanks for having me.
To our listeners, thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.